The storm over Landstuhl wasn't weather, it was a shroud. It wrapped the German night in a howling black fury. Inside the surgical ICU, the war was quieter. A war of blinking lights, hissing ventilators, and slow, mechanical beeps counting down to zero. Nurse Ilara Vance moved through the blue-hued gloom. Her sneakers were silent on the linoleum. 4 years in this ICU, she'd seen bodies broken by things she couldn't pronounce. She learned to build a wall, high and thick. Tonight it cracked. They'd brought him in 3 hours ago. No ID, no tags, just a gutshot ghost from a black site op. John Doe, catastrophic abdominal GSW, hypothermic, vitals crashing. The surgical team had done their heroics. 5 hours of brutal, desperate plumbing. They'd closed him up. Temporarily, the lead surgeon, a genius named Riggs, had finally stepped back. He peeled off his gloves, his face etched with defeat. "We've done all we can," he said, voice hollow. "It's in God's hands now." Ilara looked at the man in bed 4. He was a sculpture of ruin, a breathing monument to violence. Tubes and wires snaked from him like technological ivy. A ventilator breathed for him. His skin was the color of old ash. The doctors saw a dying man, a complex, failing system. Ilara saw the scars, the faded ink on a corded forearm, the particular way his hair was cut, the tan lines around his eyes, pale where a scope had blocked the sun. This wasn't just a soldier. This was a hunter, a long-range problem solver. Now he was the problem no one could solve. She performed her checks, adjusted his fluids. His vitals were a slow, descending slide. BP 80-50, heart rate 45 and dipping. His body was retreating, fortifying its last redoubt. As she leaned to check his pupil response, she saw it. His lips, chapped split, they moved. A faint, tremulous twitch around the breathing tube. She froze, lowered her head, her ear inches from his mouth. Over the rhythmic whoosh-click of the ventilator, she heard it, a breath shaped into sound. Not a moan, not a whimper. A pattern. 2 syllables, repeated on the dying tide of his breath. Vox trot tang. It was broken, garbled, but the rhythm was deliberate, a mantra. A call sign. Ilara's spine went rigid. This wasn't delirium. This was transmission, a signal bleeding through the static of shock. She looked from the dying sniper to the empty doorway where the doctors had conceded. They saw a machine shutting down. She was hearing a soldier, deep behind enemy lines, still trying to call in his position. Foxtrot Tango. The wall she'd built shattered. She didn't know the man, but she knew the code. Her brother, a ranger, had talked in his sleep with the same encrypted poetry. The monitor gave a soft, urgent chime. His heart rate hit 40. Time was a bullet in flight, and it was almost on target. She leaned close, her voice a firm, clear whisper in the sterile dark. "I hear you, Foxtrot Tango, I read you. Now you need to listen to me, you are not alone." His eyelids flickered, a tremor ran through his hand. For the first time in 3 hours, a number on the monitor hesitated in its fall. The hook was set, the race was on. Ilara's words hung in the antiseptic air, a direct order to a ghost. For 3 breaths, nothing changed. Then the cardiac monitor emitted a different sound, not an alarm, but a steady, strengthening beat. The number climbed from 40 to 45 to 50. A tiny rebellion against the inevitable. She didn't smile. Victory was a mile away and they had inches, but a door had cracked open. She kept her voice low, rhythmic, a lifeline thrown into deep water. "Foxtrot Tango, You are in a secured medical facility. Landstuhl, you are safe. The fight is here now. Your fight is to stay still, to let the machine breathe for you. Do you understand? His finger twitched, a microscopic spasm against the starch-white sheet. Affirmative. Good, now conserve energy. I'm with you. She worked fast. She adjusted drips, calculating doses not just by the book, but by the man. A man in this much shock needed perfusion, needed volume, but his body was a battlefield. Too much fluid could drown him from the inside. It was a tightrope. She walked it with cold precision. The night shift clerk, a young man named Tim, appeared at the glass partition, his face pale. Ilara, 2 gentlemen from DOD are here, at the main nursing station. They want access to the John Doe. Ilara didn't look up from her IV pump. Tell them visiting hours are over. Patient is unstable and under my care. They're insistent. They have paperwork. So do I. It's called a medical license. They can wait. She could feel the clock ticking in her veins. The system had gears, and they were beginning to turn. Official gears. She had minutes, maybe less. She finished her adjustments and moved to the head of the bed. She placed her hand firmly on his shoulder, a point of anchor. Listen, company is coming. Men with questions, you don't answer. You are non-responsive. That is your mission. Understood. Another faint twitch. Understood. The door hissed open. Not Tim. 2 men entered. They wore dark suits that didn't wrinkle. Their shoes were polished black mirrors. The older one had a face like a closed fist, his hair a steel-gray brush cut. The younger was all sharp angles and watchful eyes. They carried the chill of the corridor in with them. Nurse Vance, the older man's voice was flat, devoid of query. It was a statement. He flashed credentials too fast to read. Department of Defense, I'm Agent Harland. This is Agent Clark. We need to speak with the patient. Ilara stepped subtly, positioning herself between them and the bed. You can speak. He can't answer. He's medically sedated and critical. We're aware of his status, Harland said, his eyes scanning the room, the equipment, the man, assessing, cataloging. We need to confirm his identity for next of kin. The lie was smooth, practiced. He has no identification, Ilara replied, her tone matching his flatness. As per protocol, his fingerprints and DNA are being processed. You'll have the same information we get when we get it. The younger agent, Clark, moved a step closer to the monitors. His gaze lingered on the steadying vitals. He seems to be stabilizing. He's fluctuating. It's fragile. Harland's eyes locked onto Ilara. We understand you were on duty when he was admitted. Did he say anything at all? The question was a trap. She kept her face a placid mask. He was in profound shock and respiratory distress upon arrival. He was immediately intubated. He has said nothing. A silence stretched. It was filled with the sounds of the ICU, which now felt like screams. Harland nodded slowly. We'll need to review his personal effects. Bagged and tagged with security. You know the procedure. We do. Harland finally looked past her at the broken figure on the bed. His expression didn't change, but something in the room tightened. A predatory focus. We'll be back when he's awake. His country has urgent questions for him. They left as quietly as they entered. The door sighed shut. Ilara didn't move until the footsteps faded. She exhaled, a tremor in her breath she hadn't allowed them to see. She looked down at her patient. His eyes were still closed, but the muscle in his jaw was taut. He'd heard every word. He'd understood the threat. Foxtrot Tango, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Who are you that they send wolves instead of warriors? On the monitor, his heart rate spiked. 70-80, a surge of adrenaline in a body that had none to spare. Foxtrot and Tango, his lips formed silently. Then a new sound, a guttural, strained whisper fighting past the tube. She bent down, her ear almost touching his lips. The word was clear, a single, bloody syllable. Run! It wasn't a warning for him. It was a warning for her. The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Run! Ilara didn't run, she locked down. Her training took over, compartmentalizing the fear, boxing it up tight. She gave a single, sharp nod he couldn't see. Not an option, she murmured, her hands resuming their work, checking lines, projecting calm. I don't abandon my post. She needed information. The official channels were closed, poisoned by the men in suits, but the hospital had other veins, deeper, older ones. She waited for the shift change, for the predictable lull at 3 a.m. She left the ICU under the watch of a trusted colleague with a murmured excuse about a migraine pill. She didn't go to the pharmacy. She went to the basement, to medical records archives. The air was cooler here, smelling of dust and agging paper. Rows of towering shelves held the history of pain in neatly labeled boxes, but she wasn't after files. She was after a person. Old Man Henderson was a Landstuhl institution, 70 years old, a former Vietnam-era corpsman who'd seen more trauma than most of the surgeons upstairs. He stayed on as a records clerk, a living archive himself. He was also her grandfather's best friend. She found him at his desk under a dim pool of light, magnifying glass in hand, deciphering a doctor's handwritten note from 1982. Ilara Vance, he said without looking up, his voice a dry rustle. The night shift doesn't bring you down here unless the world is ending, or you need a secret. A little of both, Hendo. She leaned against his desk, cutting straight to it. John Doe, bed 4 in surgical ICU, catastrophic GSW, came in off a Black Ops lift tonight. 2 DOD spooks just visited, asking questions they shouldn't be asking. The patient is a sniper. Call sign involves Foxtrot Tango. And before he coded again, he told me to run. Henderson slowly set down his magnifying glass. He took off his glasses, polishing them on his shirt. His eyes, when he looked at her, were the color of flint. Foxtrot Tango, he repeated. The name seemed to taste familiar in his mouth. You're sure? It's all he's saying. It's his loop. Henderson leaned back, his chair creaking a protest that echoed in the silent vault. There was a team, not official, a ghost squad. Their handles were phonetic alphabet pairs. Echo Sierra, Golf Mike, Foxtrot Tango. He looked at her. Your grandfather saved Echo Sierra's life in '91. Took a piece of shrapnel the size of a cigar cutter doing it. That's how I know he shouldn't have told me. Ilara's breath caught. A ghost squad. The kind that does the things no one wants on paper. The kind that, if they're compromised, get disappeared by the very people who sent them. He nodded toward the ceiling, toward the ICU. If your patient is Foxtrot Tango, then the men who visited aren't here to debrief him. They're here to bury him. The pieces clicked, forming a terrible picture. He's not just dying from his wounds, she whispered. He's dying from his knowledge, Henderson finished. He opened a drawer, rummaged, and slid a small, nondescript key across the desk. Storage locker 114, near the old morgue entrance. Your grandfather left a box there. Said if the ghosts ever came home wounded, I might need it. I never opened it. I think it's for you. Ilara took the key. It was cold and heavy. What's in it? Knowing your granddad, likely a .45 and some field manuals. He gave a grim, thin smile, but also maybe some mercy. He was a corpsman. He believed in the oath, not the flag, the oath. She closed her fingers around the key. They'll be back at dawn, when they think I'm tired, when he's weakest. Then you have until dawn, Henderson said, his voice final. Now get out of my archives. And Ilara, don't trust the quiet. Back in the ICU, the quiet was a lie. The sniper's stats were worse. His blood pressure was collapsing again. A cold, clammy sweat glistened on his skin. He was bleeding out internally, a slow, inexorable leak the surgery hadn't fixed. The doctors had done all they could. All they were willing to do. She stood over him, the key biting into her palm. The oath Henderson mentioned thumped in her heart alongside the fear. Do no harm. But what did it mean when inaction was the greatest harm of all? A radical, forbidden idea formed. A Hail Mary from her grandfather's era of meatball surgery and desperation. A procedure so risky it was textbook malpractice. It involved bypassing the shattered plumbing with a direct, aggressive transfusion and a cocktail of drugs to force his heart to pump harder, to buy time for his body to find a seal. It could kill him in minutes. Or it could snap him back from the ledge. The men in suits would return, they would take him, and he would die in a sterile interrogation room, a complication of wounds, a line in a report. She looked at his face, the face of a weapon, a ghost, a man. Foxtrot Tango, she said, her voice steel. My name is Ilara Vance. My grandfather was Corpsman Henry Vance. He saved one of yours. I'm going to try to save you, but I have to break the rules to do it. Do you understand? One twitch for yes. A long, agonizing second. Then, the faintest dip of his index finger. Yes. It will feel like you're on fire. It will feel like you're dying. You have to fight through it. You have to come back. Do you understand? Another twitch. Yes. Ilara Vance took a deep breath. She turned to the narcotics cabinet, her access card gleaming in the low light. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a corpsman in a silent war. And she was about to declare it. The narcotics cabinet hissed open. Inside, vials and ampules gleamed under the cold light. Not healing potions, weapons, epinephrine, vasopressin, packed red blood cells. She gathered them like a soldier arming for a siege. Her movements were efficient, silent. She prepared the transfusion line, spiking the bag of O-negative blood. She drew the powerful vasoconstrictors into separate syringes, calculating doses that walked the razor's edge between shock and cardiac arrest. Tim, the night clerk, appeared at the door again. Ilara, Agent Harland is on the phone at the station. He's demanding an update, says he's coming back in 30. Her hands didn't falter. Tell him the patient is undergoing an emergency procedure. No entry, unit is closed. Procedure, what proct? Now Tim. He vanished. She was alone with the ghost. The storm outside had settled into a steady, grim rain. The only sounds were the ventilator and the frantic beat of her own heart. She leaned over him, her shadow falling across his face. This is it, on my mark. She injected the first drug, a potent bolt of synthetic adrenaline meant to scream at his heart, to shock his vessels into clamping down. On the monitor, his heart rate exploded. 100, 130, 160. The line jumped erratically. He gasped, a horrible, ragged sound against the tube. His back arched off the bed, muscles corded in agony. The restraints creaked. Fight it, she commanded, her voice low and fierce. Channel it, use it. She opened the transfusion wide. The cold, borrowed blood flooded into his vein. She watched his central venous pressure. It was too low. The blood was just filling a cracked cup. Second syringe, vasopressin, the clamp for his circulatory system. She pushed it. For a second, nothing. Then a violent shudder racked his frame. The monitors screamed a chorus of alarms, tachycardia, hypertension. His blood pressure swung wildly, 60-40 to 190-110, in a heartbeat. She was throwing grenades into a house of cards. His eyes flew open. They were not the hazy, confused eyes of sedation. They were clear, ice blue and terrifyingly focused. They locked onto hers with the intensity of a scope's crosshairs. He saw her, truly saw her. A guttural sound tore from his throat around the tube. His hand, the one not restrained, shot up, not to strike, to grab. His fingers, cold and iron-strong, clamped around her wrist. She didn't pull away, she held his gaze. "Foxtrot Tango, stay with me." He was trying to speak. His lips formed silent, urgent words. He released her wrist, and his hand moved, trembling violently, to his own chest. He tapped twice over his heart. Then his fingers dragged down, leaving a faint red smear on the gown, to his lower abdomen, the wound site. He tapped his heart again, then pointed a bloody finger directly at her. The message was clear: they target the heart, you are in the crosshairs. He collapsed back, the momentary clarity evaporating. The monitors began to settle, not into health, but into a new, fragile equilibrium. BP 9560, heart rate 110. It was unsustainable, but it was life, for now. The procedure had worked, a temporary dam against the flood. As she secured the new lines, her hand brushed against the key in her pocket, the key to locker 114. Henderson's words echoed, "Don't trust the quiet." The quiet ended. The door to the ICU hissed open, but it was Harland or Clark. It was a man in surgical scrubs, a mask pulled high. He pushed a portable ultrasound machine. "Surgical team sent me for a stat echo," he said, his voice muffled. Ilara's nerves screamed. No one had called for an echo, and surgical techs didn't do them alone. "I didn't get the page," she said, stepping subtly between him and the bed. "It's direct from Dr. Riggs. The patient's abdomen is distending, needs a look." He moved with purpose, wheeling the machine toward the bedside. His eyes were on the sniper, not the screen. Ilara saw it then, the way his gloved hands moved, not to prepare a gel bottle, but to adjust something on the side of the machine. A panel slid open slightly, not a normal panel. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, a .45 and some field manuals. "This wasn't an ultrasound." "Stop," she barked, her voice slicing the air. The man froze, his eyes flicked to her over the mask. They were dead calm. "This is medical necessity, nurse. Show me the order on the system, now." A beat of silence. The hum of the machines was deafening. The man's hand slipped into the open panel of the machine. Ilara didn't think, she acted. Her hand shot out and yanked the crash cart towards her, sending it careening into the man's legs. He grunted, stumbling. At the same moment, the sniper's eyes snapped open again. With a sound of tearing tape, his free arm ripped loose from the weakened restraint. His hand, blur-fast, seized the man's wrist as it emerged from the machine, holding a small, sleek pistol fitted with a silencer. The struggle was silent, brutal, and over in 3 seconds. The sniper twisted the man's wrist with a sickening crack. The pistol clattered to the floor. The man gasped, but before he could cry out, the sniper's other hand, still trailing IV lines, shot up and delivered a precise, devastating chop to his throat. The man in scrubs folded, gagging soundlessly, and slumped to the floor. Ilara stood frozen, staring at the scene. The ghost in bed 4 looked at her, his chest heaving. He pointed to the door, then made a slicing motion across his own throat. "Maury coming." Then his eyes rolled back. The expended effort had cost him everything. The monitors began their alarming chorus again. But on the floor, next to the fallen assassin's hand, lay the silenced pistol, and next to it, a small black electronic device, a jammer, killing the room's cameras and comms. The silent war was no longer silent. It was here, in the room, bleeding on the linoleum. Blood pooled on the linoleum, black in the low light. 2 wars were being lost, one in the sniper's body, another in the room. Ilara's training screamed at her to call a code, to hit the panic button, to declare the situation. But the panic button was dead. The jammer's tiny LED glowed a malevolent green. The assassin had cut them off. The men in suits would be coming. They were the cavalry, and they were the enemy. She moved. First the body. She dragged the limp weight of the fake tech into the ICU's small, enclosed supply closet. He was heavy, a professional's density. She shoved him behind boxes of gauze and saline, her hands slick with his blood. No time for horror. Second, the evidence. She kicked the silenced pistol under the bed, wiped the floor with a handful of sanitizer wads, turning the blood into a pink, streaky smear. The jammer she left active. Its silence was now their shield. Third, her patient. He was crashing harder this time. The violent exertion had torn something inside. Fresh, dark blood seeped through his abdominal bandages. His stats were in freefall. The temporary dam had burst. She couldn't do another heroic procedure. He had no strength left to burn. The key in her pocket felt like it was burning a hole through her scrubs. Locker 114, near the old morgue. It was a mile through the hospital corridors, an eternity. Leaving him now was a death sentence. But staying meant waiting for Harland and Clark to walk in and find a dying man and a nurse with a story they would never believe. They would secure him, and he would never wake up. She made a choice. She slammed a bolus of fluids into his line, added a steady drip of the strongest vasopressor left in her arsenal, a holding action. Listen to me, she hissed, gripping his face, forcing his glazing eyes to find hers. I have to go. I'm getting something to help you. You have to hold this line. Do you understand? You are on overwatch. You do not fall asleep. You watch that door, one more time. A flicker in the blue, a brutal, almost imperceptible nod, the discipline of a lifetime forcing focus through agony. She ran. The hallways were a blur of dim night lights and empty nursing stations. The elevator was too exposed. She took the stairs, her sneakers slapping echoes in the concrete well, down into the basement's deeper chill. The archives were dark. Henderson was gone. The air smelled of damp and decay. She found the old morgue entrance, a heavy sealed door marked with a faded biohazard symbol. To its left, a wall of dented, old-fashioned storage lockers. The key fit. The lock turned with a gritty, metallic shriek. Inside was no .45. There was a small, olive-drab metal box, army issue. She lifted it out. It was surprisingly light. She pried the lid open. On top lay a faded photograph. Her grandfather, Henry Vance, young and grinning, arm around another soldier. Both looked exhausted, elated. Behind them, a dusty medevac. Scrawled on the photo, me and Echo Sierra, Kuwait 91. Saved my skin, then I saved his. Beneath the photo, not a weapon but tools. A handful of sealed, unmarked vials of medicine, a manual syringe driver, a folded, sterile packet containing a strange, catheter-like device she recognized from old field surgery texts, an intra-aortic balloon pump, a primitive manual version. At the very bottom, a single handwritten note on yellowed paper in her grandfather's decisive script. For the ghosts, when the system won't save them, you bypass the system. Direct arterial pressure. It's a brutal dance, but it's the only one that works when the music stopped. HV. Her grandfather hadn't left a gun. He'd left a medical insurgent's toolkit, a way to fight the physiology of death when standard protocols were betrayal. She slammed the box shut. As she turned, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the corridor. Agent Clark. He stood, hands loose at his sides, blocking her path to the stairs. His sharp face was unreadable. "Nurse Vance, you left your post." His voice was quiet. "And you're holding unauthorized equipment." "It's historical, for the archives," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We checked the archives log. Henderson clocked out. You didn't sign in." He took a step forward. "Where is our asset?" "Stabilizing, after an unexpected complication." His eyes flicked to the box. "You're interfering in a matter of national security." "I'm fulfilling my oath, which is to a patient, not a flag." A faint, cold smile touched his lips. "A noble sentiment. It gets people killed." He reached inside his jacket. Ilara didn't wait to see what he pulled out. She swung the metal box with all her strength. It connected with his reaching arm. He grunted, sidestepping, and she bolted past him, not for the stairs, but down the darker corridor leading to the old boiler room. She heard his footsteps behind her, swift and sure. She was fast, but he was trained. He would catch her. She rounded a corner, saw a heavy, riveted door marked, "Furnace Room No Admittance." She wrenched it open, slipped inside, and slammed it shut, fumbling for a lock. There was none. The room was hot, roaring with the sound of the hospital's ancient primary furnace. The air vibrated. In the hellish red glow from the furnace grate, she saw it, a heavy iron maintenance bar leaning against a pipe. As the door began to open, she grabbed the bar, wedged it under the handle, and kicked it with her heel. It jammed, sealing the door shut with a solid clang. A fist hammered on the metal from the other side, once, twice, then stopped. She was trapped, but so was he for a moment. Chest heaving in the scorching air, she looked at her grandfather's box. The archaic balloon pump, the vials. It was a plan, a terrible, desperate plan. She had the tools. But Clark was between her and her patient. And the clock had run out. The furnace roared like a trapped animal. Heat waves shimmered from the iron beast, baking the air. Ilara's scrubs stuck to her skin instantly. On the other side of the door, the silence was worse than the pounding had been. Agent Clark was waiting. She had minutes, maybe less. The sniper was alone, bleeding out, his borrowed time evaporating. The jammer's battery would die. The cameras would blink back on, revealing an empty bed, a missing nurse, a hidden corpse. Think! Her eyes scanned the furnace room in the hellish red glow. Pipes snaked upward into darkness. Maintenance ladders. A small service elevator for coal, long since converted to gas, its cage door hanging open. An idea formed, terrible, dangerous. She opened her grandfather's box, not to the archaic pump, but to the unmarked vials. She uncapped one, sniffed. A sharp, chemical odor, potent, fast-acting sedative, probably ketamine, a field amnesiac. She soaked a handful of gauze from her pocket with it. Then she moved to the service elevator shaft. It was a vertical tomb of darkness, the old pulley system rusted but intact. She peered down. It descended into a deeper black. But to the side, about 8 feet below the door level, was another access hatch, likely leading to the parallel steam tunnel corridor. She heard the scrape of metal at the boiler room door. Clark was working on the bar. No time. She grabbed the iron maintenance bar, took a breath of scorching air, and slammed it against the main steam release valve on the furnace's side. A cataclysmic hiss erupted. A jet of superheated, pressurized steam billowed out, filling the room with a blinding, white fog. The roar became a scream. She couldn't see, she could only feel. She ducked low beneath the cloud and scrambled to the side of the door, pressing herself against the wall. The door burst open. Clark charged through the steam, gun drawn, squinting against the scalding vapor. He expected her to be fleeing or hiding. He didn't expect her to be right beside the entrance. As he passed her, she lunged, not at his gun, at his face. She shoved the ketamine-soaked gauze hard over his nose and mouth. He reacted like a snake, elbow jamming back into her ribs. Pain exploded in her side, but she held on, riding him, her weight forcing the cloth down. He thrashed, choking on the steam and the drug. His finger tightened on the trigger. A bullet sparked off the iron furnace with a deafening pang. His movements grew jerky, sluggish. The gun hand drooped. He sagged to his knees, then onto his side, unconscious, the steam swirling over him. Ilara snatched his gun. She didn't hesitate. She dragged him by his shoulders into the service elevator cage. She hit the ancient down button. With a groan of protest, the elevator began a shuddering descent into the shaft, taking the sedated agent into the bowels of the hospital. One threat neutralized temporarily. She grabbed the box, clutched the gun, and ran back into the corridor. She took the stairs two at a time, her side screaming in pain where his elbow had connected. The ICU hallway was still dark, silent. The jammer was working. She slipped back into the room. The sight stopped her heart. The sniper was awake. His free hand was clenched around the railing, knuckles white. His eyes were fixed on the door, hyper-alert, swimming in pain. He had watched. He had held the line. But the cost was written in the fresh, soaking crimson of his bandages. "Took your time," he rasped, the words a shredded whisper around the tube. "Company," she dropped the box on the crash cart, her hands already flying. She tore away the sodden dressing. The surgical wound was distended, oozing dark blood. He was bleeding from an arterial source this time, a death sentence in minutes. "Grandfather says hello," she muttered, prepping the strange catheter-like device from the box. The manual intra-aortic balloon pump. It was a Hail Mary of Hail Marys. She would have to thread it blindly, feeling for the femoral artery, advancing it against the current of his dying blood flow, then manually inflate and deflate it to force perfusion to his core. "This will hurt," she said, meeting his eyes. A almost imperceptible nod. "Do it." She worked with a brutal, focused grace. Needle into the groin, guide wire, the thick catheter. She was flying blind by feel alone. He didn't make a sound, but a tremor like a seismic shock ran through his entire body. Suddenly, the door to the ICU burst open. Not Clark, not another assassin. Agent Harland, and he wasn't alone. Two uniformed MPs flanked him, rifles held at low ready. Harland's eyes swept the room, the bloody floor, the frantic nurse, the archaic device in her hands, the sniper's terrifying stillness. His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Nurse Vance, step away from the patient. You are under arrest for the assault of a federal officer, interference with a national security operation, and practicing medicine far outside your scope." Ilara didn't stop. She pushed the catheter in another inch. "He has a bleeder. I am controlling it. If I stop, he dies in 90 seconds. His condition is no longer your concern. MPs, secure her." The MPs moved forward. The sniper's ice-blue eyes, fixed on Harland, narrowed. With a final, monumental effort, his hand, the one still tangled in IV lines, lifted, not in threat. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Harland. His voice was a ghost of sound, but the word was unmistakable. "Azrael." Harland froze. The color drained from his face. The calm, bureaucratic mask shattered, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. The MPs hesitated, sensing the shift. "What did you say?" Harland whispered, taking a step closer. The sniper's lips moved again, shaping the silent call sign. Foxtrot Tango. Then, the accusing finger still aimed at Harland, he forced out two more shredded words. "You burned us." Harland stared. The name Azrael hung in the air like a curse. The project name, the truth. Ilara saw it, the recognition, the guilt. Harland wasn't just cleaning up a mess. He was covering a crime, his crime. In that frozen second of revelation, Ilara made her move. She connected the syringe to the catheter port, drew back, and got a flash of dark, oxygenated blood. She had the artery. She looked from the ghost on the table to the ghost in the suit. "He's not dying today, Agent," she said, her voice ringing in the silent room. "He's testifying." Harland's shock curdled into something darker, more desperate. The standoff wasn't over. It had just become a confession. The word Azrael changed everything. It sucked the oxygen from the room. The two MPs, trained to follow orders, not witness confrontations with biblical demons, shifted their weight. Their rifles, aimed low, wavered. Harland's face was a parchment of shock, then fury. The revelation had been a gut punch. Now came the rage. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he spat, but the venom was thin, defensive. His eyes darted to the MPs. "This is the psychosis of a dying brain. Secure the nurse." Ilara didn't wait for their compliance. She attached the manual pump to the catheter. With a firm, steady pressure, she compressed the bulb, forcing air into the tiny intra-aortic balloon. It was a crude, physical override of his failing heart. On the monitor, his blood pressure stuttered, then jerked upward, 70/40 to 110/65. A mechanical heartbeat. "See that?" she said, her voice cutting through Harland's bluster. "That's not psychosis, that's physiology. He's alive to talk, and he will." The sniper's eyes remained locked on Harland. The pain was there, a universe of it, but it was now channeled, focused into that blue laser of hatred. He tried to speak, but only a wet, gurgling whisper came out. He lifted his hand again, weaker this time, and made a slow, sweeping gesture, a horizon. Then he brought his fingers together in a tight, violent pinch. "Everything gone." "Project Azrael," Ilara repeated, the name foul on her tongue. "An angel of death. Was that the mission name or the cleanup operation?" Harland took a step forward, his hand moving toward his own sidearm. The movement was subtle, but the MPs saw it. One of them, a sergeant with a weathered face, cleared his throat. "Sir, perhaps we should secure the scene and await a medical evac. This is a patient in crisis." "This is an asset in terminal failure," Harland snapped, not looking away from Ilara. "And she is sabotaging a containment operation. Your orders are to assist me, now." But the spell was broken. The absolute authority was cracked. The sergeant didn't move. The sniper seized the moment of hesitation. With a Herculean effort, he spoke, each word a monument of will. "Village Alsara," he choked, blood tinting the spittle at the tube's edge. "Not a cell, a school you knew." Harland went very still. A different kind of silence filled the room. The silence of a secret, long buried, cracking open its tomb. "The order was for a high-value terrorist facilitator," Harland said, the words automatic, rote. A cover story recited 1,000 times. The sniper shook his head, a tiny, devastating movement. He tapped his own temple, then pointed at Harland. "You saw the intel, you saw the truth." "The girl," the sniper whispered, his voice fading, "the programmer." That was the final key. Ilara saw it click into place for the MP sergeant. His face, previously neutral, hardened into a grim mask of disgust. He'd likely served tour. He knew what school and girl meant in the context of a black op gone wrong. "Sir," the sergeant said, his voice formal and cold, "I am invoking commander's discretion. This situation requires higher oversight. I am placing you under temporary detainment until JAG and NCIS can be notified." Harlan's composure shattered. "You insignificant grunt. Do you have any idea what you're touching? This goes to the deputy secretary. This man is a traitor. He killed his own team." "Then he'll face a court-martial," the sergeant said, unmoved. He nodded to his partner. "Secure Agent Harlan's weapon." As the other MP moved, Harlan moved faster. He wasn't drawing his gun. He was lunging for the crash cart, specifically for the exposed syringe of concentrated potassium chloride Ilara had prepared earlier for the procedure. He didn't want to shoot anyone. He wanted to induce a silent cardiac arrest. A medical complication. Plausible deniability. "No," Ilara yelled, throwing her body between Harlan and the cart. But the sniper was faster. His hand, trailing wires, shot out. He didn't grab Harlan. He grabbed the central line of his own IV pole and yanked it with all his remaining strength. The heavy pole toppled like a felled tree, crashing into Harlan's legs. Harlan stumbled, the syringe flying from his grasp and skittering across the floor. In that second of chaos, the sergeant was on him. A professional takedown maneuver. Harlan fought, but he was a suit, not a soldier. In 3 seconds, he was face down on the bloody linoleum, a knee in his back, his wrists being zip-tied. The sergeant looked up at Ilara, breathing hard. "You need to finish saving him, nurse, because he needs to talk, a lot." Ilara turned back to her patient. His intervention had cost him. His stats were crashing again. The balloon pump was working, but he was fatting, the last of his fuel spent. She worked frantically, squeezing the bulb rhythmically, manually driving his circulation. "Stay with me, Foxtrot Tango, you hear that? You got him, now you have to stay, you have to tell the story." His eyes found hers. The fury was gone, replaced by an infinite exhaustion, and something else, a plea. He mouthed a word, a name. "Michael." Then another. "Sophie." He was not just namming victims, he was giving her a mission. The girl, the programmer. Harlan, pinned to the floor, began to laugh, a low, broken sound. "You think you've won? You have no idea. Azrael wasn't one mission, it's a protocol, and you've just triggered it. They're already on the way, not to debrief, to scorch the earth." Sirens became audible in the distance, not police, the distinct, dual-tone scream of military vehicles. The sergeant's radio crackled to life. "All units, all personnel, this is a code Blackbird. Isolate and contain surgical ICU. Authority, Deputy Director, Special Projects, no one in or out. Acknowledge." The other MP's face paled. "Code Blackbird, that's a hostile containment, internal threat." They weren't sending help. They were sending a quarantine. A final solution. Ilara looked from the sirens flashing red through the window, to the defiant sergeant, to the broken traitor on the floor, to the dying hero on the bed. The truth was out. But the system designed to bury, it was rolling right to their door. She kept squeezing the bulb. Whoosh-click, whoosh-click. A manual heartbeat against the coming storm. The code Blackbird sirens swelled, a mechanical wail swallowing the storm. Red and blue lights strobed through the ICU windows, painting the scene in pulses of emergency. The sergeant, his nameplate read Valdez, didn't hesitate. He barked at his partner. "Barricade the door, use the crash cart, the bed, everything." He looked at Ilara. How long can you keep him talking? As long as his brain has oxygen, she said, her hand a relentless metronome on the balloon pump. Squeeze, release, squeeze, minutes, maybe less. The sniper's eyes were fixed on the ceiling, glazing. He was retreating, the pain and blood loss pulling him under. Foxtrot Tango, Ilara's voice cracked like a whip. Look at me, you named them, Michael, Sophie, now give me the rest, for the record, now. A tremor passed through him, his lips parted. The heart monitor showed the fragile rhythm her hands were forcing into his body. Operation Azrael, he began, each word a stone lifted from a grave. Yemen, Al-Sara Valley, target was a cryptography prodigy, 16 years old, girl. He sucked a ragged breath against the tube. Harlan's intel said hostile asset, our eyes said school, civilian, protected. Harlan, prone on the floor, writhed. Lies, she was coding for the AQAP network. The sniper's eyes cut to him, a flash of blue fire. You altered the feed, we saw the raw, you burned it after. He returned his gaze to Ilara, his anchor. Team lead Michael, call sign Echo Sierra, refused the kill order. Harlan remote detonated his exfil chopper, made it look enemy fire, then he sent cleaners for us. The story tumbled out in broken clinical fragments, a betrayal wrapped in a flag. The Ghost Squad deemed liabilities hunted by their own. Foxtrot Tango, the lone survivor, had been running for years. He found the girl, Sophie, hidden her, had been shot not by an enemy, but by a cleaner in Seattle while trying to access an old, dead-drop network for funds. The drive, he whispered, coordinates to the cache, proof, buried with Michael's dog tags, dry dock E4. The door shuddered under a heavy impact. A voice boomed through a bullhorn from the hallway. This is Deputy Director Chase, Special Projects. Open this door. You are harboring a fugitive and interfering with a federal operation. Valdez looked at Ilara, then at the sniper. The drive, is it there? A weak nod, yes. Another crash against the door. The barricade slid an inch. Ilara knew what she had to do. The truth was no longer in the room. It was out there, buried. And the system at the door would ensure it stayed buried. She made a decision. She stopped pumping. For a second, nothing. Then the monitor began a slow, steady decline. What are you doing? Valdez hissed. Listening, she said, her voice suddenly calm. She leaned close to the sniper. I need you to code, right now, VFib, make it believable. Can you do that? Understanding flickered in his dimming eyes. A SEAL's training included how to mimic death. He gave the faintest nod. She grabbed the paddles of the defibrillator. Charging, clear. She didn't place them on him. Instead, she jammed them against the metal side rail of the bed and discharged them. A deafening crack, and a flash of light filled the room. On the monitor, she manually triggered the alarm for ventricular fibrillation, a frantic, chaotic waveform. He's coding, she screamed, her voice pitched with genuine desperation. The stress, he's arrested. I need a crash team now. From the hall, the pounding stopped. Confusion replaced force. Valdez caught on instantly. He yanked open the door just a crack, enough to shout into the hallway. We have a cardiac arrest. Your asset is dying. You want him alive to interrogate. You get a medical team in here. A tense silence from the hallway. Then the deputy director's voice, tight with fury. Stand down. Let the medical personnel through. The barricade was pulled aside. Two bewildered trauma nurses and a resident Ilara knew, a good doctor named Singh, rushed in. They saw the coding patient, the defibrillator paddles in Ilara's hands, the chaotic monitor. Take over, Ilara cried, stepping back, her hands in the air. I've done all I can. As Dr. Singh and the nurses descended on the bed, initiating real CPR, the focus shifted. Harland was dragged out by Valdez. Deputy Director Chase, a tall, iron-haired man in a trench coat, stood in the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on Ilara. "You," he said, "with me." He led her not to custody, but to a nearby empty family consult room. He closed the door. The bullhorn was gone. He just looked at her, exhausted. A school. A school, Ilara confirmed, her body trembling with spent adrenaline, and a drive with the proof, buried with a hero's dog tags. Chase closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they held a grim resolve. Harland is a fanatic. He believed, truly believed, any collateral damage was justified for the security the girl's code could breach. He went rogue, far beyond his mandate. Will he be held accountable, or will this be another training accident? Chase met her gaze. The code Blackbird was his last gambit. He no longer has friends in high places. The drive, if it's where he says, it will be recovered by me, and it will go where it needs to go. He was offering a pact, silence for justice. "And Foxtrot Tango," she asked, "will receive the best medical care this country can offer, and then a new identity, a quiet life. He's earned that." "And the girl, Sophie." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Chase's lips. "I'm told a very prestigious, very secure university in Canada has just offered a full scholarship to an exceptional new student." It was the best outcome, the only one that didn't end in a grave or a headline. 1 week later, the storm had passed. Pale German sunlight streamed into a private recovery room. The man in the bed was no longer John Doe. In the system, he was a retired logistics officer named Thomas Cowell, recovering from a rare abdominal aneurysm. The story was seamless. Ilara stood in the doorway. He was sitting up, breathing on his own, reading a book. He looked younger. The ghost was receding, leaving a man behind. He looked up and saw her. He set the book down. "Nurse Vance. Mr. Cowell." They looked at each other. The silence held a universe of understood things: blood on linoleum, the smell of ketamine, the sound of a manual heartbeat. "I never asked," he said, his voice still rough but clear, "why you didn't run." She walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful grounds. "You were my patient, that's all." "That's not all," he said softly. She turned. "No, it's not. My grandfather saved one of yours. It felt like a debt. And you were trying to protect a child. That's a flag I can salute." He nodded, his eyes bright. "Thank you for the life and for the hearing." "What will you do," she asked, "with the quiet life?" He looked at his hands, the hands that had held a rifle, a scalpel, her wrist. "I'll learn to be still," he said. "It will be the hardest mission yet." She smiled. "You'll manage." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Ilara." She stopped. "The treehouse password," he said. "Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. It means what the fuck." Michael's idea of a joke. He paused. "He'd have liked you. You have the same operational stubbornness." A tear finally escaped, tracing a clean line down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said. She left him in the sunlight. The war was over, not with a bang, but with a heartbeat. A stolen, stubborn, manually pumped heartbeat that refused to stop. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't a rifle. It's a nurse who remembers her oath. And a ghost who refuses to be silenced.